Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Alter Your Health Live, your source of information and inspiration to promote the holistic transformation of your health and the health of our planet. I'm your host, Dr. Benjamin Alter.
And I'm your co-host, Dr. Susanna Alter.
And we're happy to be with you again here Thursday, 1 p.m. Mountain Time on Facebook and on Instagram. And we're talking today about anti-nutrients, which I think we're kind of late to the game in terms of discussing this topic. I think it's very widely talked about these days, the topic of lectins and oxalates and phytates and how they might be making you sick. So you probably have heard these terms before, and we wanted to chime in on the conversation and share our perspective.
Yeah, I'd say probably more so in the low carb communities are people having more discussions about these anti-nutrients. And that's because a lot of the foods that contain higher levels of these quote unquote anti-nutrients are plant-based foods. They're your grains and legumes and certain leafy greens that people that eat a vegetarian or vegan diet eat a lot more of. So yes, we wanted to talk about, what are these anti-nutrients? Are they really as bad as some people are making them out to be? And do you really have to be so scared of them?
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting because we've talked about it before, and maybe I don't know who said this, who has this, who's claims to have said this, but we all love hearing good things about our bad habits. And I think that on the other side of things, we like seeing bad things about what might be quote unquote good habits, like, which therefore reinforces our questionable behavior. So I think the bottom, kind of the foundational thing that I would like to just totally dissolve and put at rest is uncertainty, because I think that uncertainty breeds grounds in which we can progress mindlessly because we just aren't sure what's going on. And the fact of the matter is, when it comes to a lot of things, we aren't sure. A lot of things we don't know. But when it comes to lectins, phytates, oxalates, there's a lot of certainty with regard to what's happening biochemically in your body. And as you will soon see, there's absolutely nothing to worry about. Okay. So
yeah, these three anti-nutrients have actually been studied quite a bit. So
once again, phytates, oxalates, and lectins. So I think, Dr. Gundry, Plant Paradox, he's probably most famous for raising the question about lectins specifically, but I think he speaks to all three of these potential anti-nutrients. And yeah, there's a big wave of uncertainty and questions. Are vegetables really safe? Are they actually still health foods, or should we be eating low carb, low grain, low lectin diets, which really, when it comes down to it, means high protein, high fat, right? If you're not eating grains, legumes, and vegetables of all sorts, you're going to be eating fat and protein. Anyways.
So did you want to start with lectins?
We can start with whichever one you want to start with.
Okay. Well, let's start with lectins because you brought it up. And yeah, let's talk about some of the theories, some of the kind of stories that are being put out.
Should we talk about what they are and where they're found first?
Sure, you can talk about that.
Yeah, lectins are a nutrient it's a chemical compound found in beans primarily. However, it's also in grains and really
also
pretty much
a little bit of everything.
Yeah, it's pretty much to some degree in all plants that come from the earth. And I think that some people have said that it's really the defense mechanism of the plant, and it's a toxin that is supposed to deter any predators from eating the plant and this kind of immune system of the plant. And therefore it might be, harming us as well when we eat the plants. So that's kind of what lectins are.
Yeah. And so lectins in high amounts, they are toxic. What lectins do are they coat the intestinal lining and they impede absorption of nutrients, but they're also an irritant to the intestines and can cause a lot of intestinal inflammation and any symptoms that kind of stem from that, like diarrhea, upset, pain, the whole leaky gut phenomenon. And so because of this, there's, a lot of gut health experts that say you really need to get out all but really, we'll go into this later, lectins in small amounts are actually very good for the body. So one myth I'd like to completely bust is that beans do contain lectins, but when you cook the beans, the lectins basically are gone. Same thing with a lot of grains. Sure, if you were to eat raw beans, you would get a lot of intestinal upset, but
that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It just means that there's something wrong with eating raw beans. That's not how they're intended to be eaten. Never has been, never will be.
Exactly. So let's talk about, low lectins in small amounts, because right now in, I'd say, pop nutritional culture, they are completely demonized as if there are no good qualities about lectins.
Yeah.
But really, lectins have been studied in small amounts to actually have anti-cancer properties.
Well, the first time I heard the term lectin was not in the context of nutrition. It was in the context of oncology. And lectins are the active compound in mistletoe therapy, which is an alternative cancer treatment. And when you are, standardizing a mistletoe extract, they standardize it based on the lectin content. And I remember researching and diving into the science of mistletoe and lectin therapy for cancer. And it's a potent immune stimulator, an immune activator, these lectins. And lectins in mistletoe are obviously different than lectins in beans. They're probably, I don't know the quantity. Maybe you could measure the lectins in mistletoe versus beans, but in any case, the lectins have the same immune stimulating compound, whether they're in beans or any other plant.
Yeah, and they've been studied. Actually, lectins can actually differentiate between tumor cells and healthy cells, and they can help to obliterate the tumor cells but leave the healthy cells in the body untouched. So pretty cool information out there about the healing effects of low amounts of lectins.
Right. It's almost as if these plant compounds are informing the immune system on how to stay active, stay resilient, stay intelligent to defend you against other things that might otherwise harm you. So just to answer the question, are lectins bad? Well, very clearly, no, they're quite the contrary. They're part of a healthy diet because they activate your immune system and keep your immune system, on top of its game.
Unless you're taking in massive doses in the form of uncooked beans and things like that.
Yeah. So, moving on to phytates.
Yeah, let's talk about phytates. I think phytates are one of the most well-known anti-nutrients out there. They're also known to be found in beans, legumes, nuts. And so this is where the whole soaking trend comes from, because they found that if you soak your nuts, you soak your grains, you soak your beans, it deactivates the phytates, and then you can cook them and eat them. And really,
well, does it like wash them away?
Yeah, it washes them away. So it doesn't deactivate, sorry.
So yeah, you want to soak them and then get rid of that water and then rinse the beans or grains or nuts. And then you have nuts or grains or beans with a much lower phytate concentration.
And why phytates are thought to be anti-nutrients is that there's research showing that it impedes our absorption of iron and zinc specifically, but also other minerals to some extent. But the fascinating thing about this finding is that this negative effect of phytate consumption was only found in people who had a poor diet. a low nutritional diet. So what does that even mean? Well, there's other research showing that in people that eat more fruits and vegetables, people with vegetarian and vegan diets, they have more of the intestinal bacteria that breaks down phytates naturally. So ironically, the more phytates you eat and the less animal products you eat, the more your body is able to break down phytates and absorb minerals, even more so, like, for example, if you were eating a totally phytate-free diet.
Yeah, it comes back to the microbiome, and we talk about the microbiome a lot on this podcast, and shifts in the microbiome take place over time, completely dependent on what foods we're taking in, right? What foods we're feeding our microbiome. So if we're feeding our microbiome, animal protein and meat, dairy, and eggs, we're going to have a microbiome that can't really tolerate healthy, beneficial sources of, phytates and lectins and these sort of things. And we might be symptomatic, and we might look at our symptoms and be like, oh, I can't tolerate the grains and the beans, so that means that they're not healing. But really the opposite is true. Really, if we're symptomatic and we can't tolerate these kind of healthy sources of nutrients, then it just means we need to,
actually eat more, optimize our gut microbiome.
But in a way that isn't overwhelming the microbiome, because I think a lot of people go gung-ho.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool. So I've definitely known about phytates and iron absorption and other minerals. So I'll ask you some questions.
Okay.
So should people be concerned about phytates and their iron or zinc stores? Should people maybe supplement or go out of their way to make sure that they're getting these kind of minerals in their diet?
Well, as long as they're eating a healthy diet with lots of fruits and vegetables, no, I don't think that they really have to go out of their way. But there is interesting research showing that taking vitamin C during a high phytate meal helps to absorb more of the iron, despite the fact that there's more. That was a very specific study. I wouldn't just, typically we don't really recommend vitamin C supplements anyway.
Well, what came to mind for me, the interesting thing is that if we look at spinach, for example, which we're going to get to when we talk about oxalates, but if we look at leafy greens have a lot of iron, they have a lot of vitamin C as well. And if we are eating leafy greens with whole grains or legumes, then that's like, it offsets or complements very nicely in terms of the nutrients and the quote unquote anti-nutrients that would potentially, get in the way.
It's like the plants have figured it all out for us. We try to manipulate things with supplements, but the plants have everything we need.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people reductionistically look at these phytates and potential things and study them in isolation to better understand them. And then that leads to these research studies that make people, raise red flags and become really scared and worried about what they're eating. But when we go back to the kind of the foundations of eating whole foods in their natural, unadulterated form, organically grown from mineral-rich soils, we just see how that is always the answer, always has been and always will be. So
yeah. And if you want to soak your nuts and seeds and beans, do it. That will, it will increase some bioavailability.
I've known a lot of people, not me personally, but I've known a lot of people who claim to tolerate soaking beans, especially before cooking them for 24 hours or so, and being able to digest them. And those same people might have symptoms of gas and bloating from eating canned beans or something like that, which tend to be higher in phytates and maybe lectins and these things that can just potentially irritate the bowel a little bit if we don't have, once again, that microbiome that is able to digest and process these sort of quote unquote anti-nutrients.
So that's actually kind of a sign that some gut health optimization may be indicated.
That's what I would take from that symptom as well.
But the other thing before we move on to oxalates is that these foods that are higher in phytates, especially beans, all legumes, these are some of the, this is like the world's healthiest food. There's so much great research showing that regular consumption of beans helps to lower heart disease, obesity, just also lots of long-term chronic illnesses.
Beans, the magical fruit.
Yes. And also phytates have been shown also to have anti-cancer properties. They actually upregulate natural killer cells that help to attack cancer cells but leave the healthy cells.
Come on, you guys, this is what we want. This is not what we don't want. It's what we want.
The other thing is that there's a study showing that women that ate more phytates in their diet had less bone loss later in life than women that had a lower phytate diet. So yeah, just another interesting fact.
Correlation. Likely.
Exactly.
But in any case, moving on to oxalates, which are kind of the third big category of these potential quote unquote anti-nutrients. And I don't, these are not anti-nutrients. These are just plant compounds that have been called anti-nutrients. Let's just get that out of the way once and for all. But oxalate, the last one that we're going to be talking about, most commonly found in the highest amounts in spinach. It's in pretty much, once again, all leafy greens, all plants that come from the earth.
It's actually really low in kale. People think it's high in kale, but it's actually really low in kale.
Compared to spinach?
Yeah, it's spinach, beet greens, and collard greens that are like the three that have the most oxalate in it.
So oxalates, most commonly known for getting in the way of kidney filtration and causing kidney stones, oxalate kidney stones, which we don't want. But yeah.
And it's known as an anti-nutrient because it binds on to calcium. So
to form those calcium oxalate stones,
yeah. So it's more, it actually, if someone is eating spinach for their calcium, it's actually, spinach might not be the best source of calcium because the oxalate does bind on to the calcium in the spinach. So you can't.
But wasn't there something about cooked spinach versus raw spinach?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Cooking reduces the amount of oxalates in those leafy greens.
Yeah. But it also reduces the active and bioavailable vitamin C and other vitamins to some. It's kind of, so what I always say is, mix cooked with raw, and don't overdo cooked or raw unless there's a reason to do so. But the other really important and very common sense thing when it comes to oxalate, calcium oxalate kidney stones, and overall kidney health and overall health in general is the context of the biochemistry of the body in which these compounds are reacting and being absorbed. And specifically in the context of a high protein, high meat, high animal protein diet, one of the byproducts of protein metabolism is acid formation in the body. The proteins are made up of amino acids, and when we break down amino acids, we get amino or ammonia, the nitrogen, and we get the acid. And the acid acidifies the body, acidifies the kidney filtration system to some degree.
The urine.
And acidifies the urine, which is the waste product. So if we have an acidic environment, that is the environment in which we promote the formation of these calcium oxalate kidney stones. So people who don't eat meat, dairy, and eggs very, very rarely get kidney stones because they tend to be more alkaline in their biochemistry and their pH balance. So kidney stones is really a phenomenon of animal protein eaters who also eat a higher oxalate diet, who are also dehydrated. Those are kind of the three trifecta characteristics of creating kidney stones.
Well, and it's not so much even that they're eating that they're taking in a lot of oxalates. It's just some people are genetically predisposed to being super absorbers of oxalates. But there's interesting scientific research showing that when people decrease oxalate consumption through their food, their body actually creates oxalates more so internally as a byproduct of the breakdown of
Which goes to show that
foods.
oxalates are not an anti-nutrient; they're a necessary nutrient.
Well,
right?
it's a waste. It's a breakdown. It's like a waste product. So it's not necessarily something the body really needs.
But if the body doesn't need it, then why would the body create it?
Well, it's a waste product. It's a waste product from the other food that
I see.
those people are eating more of. So yeah, it goes back to really what Ben was saying, the context. What is the diet when we step back and take a holistic look at the diet? Like Ben said, there's amazing research showing that people who cut animal products out of their diet have like half the risk of or even more.
It's more than half the risk. It's much more than half the risk. You really don't run across people on a whole food plant-based diet getting kidney stones. It just really doesn't happen.
Yeah, because also people who are on a whole food plant-based diet, they obviously have a better microbiome, as we were saying. And one of the beneficial bacteria that we have in our gut is Oxalobacter something, and their job is specifically to break down oxalates.
We've got our buddies on board helping us along the way. So I think one of the big take homes from, looking at these lectins and these phytates and these oxalates is looking at the change in time of gut health and the change in time of the microbiome. As we introduce these things into our diet, we shift the ecosystem within the microbiome to a way, in a way that allows for more resilience and more ability to tolerate these beneficial compounds. Because these anti-nutrients, once again, they are not anti-nutrients when we have a healthy, diverse microbiome. These are nutrients that support the immune system in fighting cancer, amongst so many other things. They keep us well. These nutrients, these plant compounds. So as we, maybe we can take, I know we're already at enough time, but I wanted to speak to, it's very common, and we kind of alluded to this a little bit. It's very common for people to have some symptoms from eating these higher lectin, higher phytate, higher oxalate foods. So what is our approach? What do you think people should do?
Well, so what I always say is it's really important to look at the underlying cause. I mean, if you're feeling like you're getting symptoms from eating these high fiber, high phytate, high lectin foods, then yes, that's a great indicator that there is some inflammation happening in the gut. But the long-term solution is not to keep these foods out of your diet. Yeah, the solution is to find a way to bring them back into your diet in a slow, sustainable way so that we can promote the health of the microbiome. And usually there is some kind of underlying factor that is causing this intestinal inflammation or dysbiosis in the first place. So it's really important to identify what that is in that individual.
Yeah, and for more information on that, maybe going back and listening to our SIBO lecture or our glyphosate GMO issue, that it is an issue, but we recorded a podcast on the issue. So these are kind of things that we would see as potential root causes of gut health issues, for people who can't tolerate these beneficial plant compounds. And I think that another thing is, I think a lot of people, just look at a can of kidney beans and be like, all right, I can't eat a can of kidney beans. That means I can't eat any beans. And the fact of the matter is that there are dozens of varieties of beans.
And actually, kidney beans is highest in phytates.
And kidney beans is the worst one. If you can't tolerate beans, then stay away from kidney beans. And try lentils. Lentils tend to be a little bit more digestible. Soak them, of course. Cook them really thoroughly, ideally with a pressure cooker rather than from a can. These kind of basic things, just, once again, back to the foundations, back to common sense, eating real food in its unadulterated state, closest to earth as possible. So I think that people can make progress and avoid getting trapped and sucked into this can't tolerate lectin, must stay away from phytate, oxalate, anti-nutrient foods.
Need to do the carnivore diet.
Need to do carnivore, can't eat vegetables, more meat, more protein, more dairy, more eggs, more fat. That's just really not the answer. So if you can't tolerate fiber foods, if you can't tolerate these kind of these kind of phytate, lectin, oxalate based foods, then it's a good sign to listen to your body and figure out what's going on and how can I optimize my microbiome to a place where I can tolerate these healing foods.
Yeah, and if we didn't say it directly enough already, because it's certainly implied, but I see a lot of people who have been eating a vegan diet who develop, if they have had GI symptoms or maybe something came up for them, point to the vegan diet as the issue.
Yeah.
And it's really...
What's up with that, guys?
And then they say, oh, I need to do one of these SIBO diets or FODMAPs diets or GAPS diets or carnivore diets in order to heal my gut. And that's just simply not the case.
It reminds me of, and I don't want to go off on another tangent, but it reminds me of diabetes and insulin resistance. And a lot of people who have blood sugar issues, they look at the blood sugar, the symptom, and they don't really understand the underlying cause, the insulin resistance, which is caused by excessive saturated fat in the diet, in the body. And that's what causes the blood sugar dysregulation. So the answer is not low carb diet. That's a great way, as I say, to manage the symptoms of insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes, but it does nothing in terms of getting to the root of the issue and supporting your body and reversing what's going on. Mm-hmm. So it's important to look at these symptoms from an objective perspective and move forward mindfully, hopefully with the support of someone who knows what's going on in the body. And if you want to work with someone who knows what's going on in the body, we are taking new patients, new clients individually, one-on-one. And we also have our healing community where we engage in really deep and broad conversations on all topics related to nutrition and these kind of things, as well as mind-body medicine. And we'd love to see you in one of the meetings. We are offering, for the time being, a free trial, 2 weeks for free. So go to www.alter.health and learn more.
Yeah, and if you're interested in working with us one-on-one, we offer free 15-minute consults to see if we'd be a good fit and to see if we'd be able to support you. So also go to our website to find out where you can schedule one of those.
Peace and love, and until next time, you guys.
Bye.